Little bit of a rocky, little bit of a rocky road, but we've gotten there. A warm welcome to everybody to this event run by Abolition 2000 and other co-sponsoring organizations on reversing nuclearization from nuclear weapons sharing in Belarus and NATO countries to a European nuclear weapon-free zone. And I'm glad to see lots of names popping up and lots of attendees for such a critical and timely discussion. My name is Teresa Berkman. I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a Kiwi. I'm based in Berlin. And today I'm honored to represent the World Future Council, which is one of the co-sponsoring organizations of today's event, where I'm a senior researcher and a policy analyst. To give you a little bit of a introduction into what the World Future Council do and how we're connected to this group of wonderful co-sponsoring organizations and this topic. The Council is a Hamburg-based think and do tank, and we highlight and advance future just policy solutions. So the Council is made up of about 50 global change makers, and we promote intergenerational equity and safeguarding the rights of future generations of life. And when it comes to this work, of course, the right of future generations not to inherit a conflict-ridden world or a natural environment destroyed by nuclear warfare is a very, very important aspect that we have been working on for a long time. So I'm very honored to be asked to moderate the session today. And I'm very excited to hear the input of our wonderful lineup of speakers. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. We'll introduce you individually as we go through the program. And we will get the questions run up and running after the presentations. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We'd ask you to put your questions throughout the event and at the end when we do the question time in the Q&A box rather than in the chat. We'll keep an eye out just in case anyone misses that memo, but it would be wonderful to keep them in the Q&A box so that we can make sure that we don't miss anything. One little point that I wanted to bring up also about the work of the World Future Council and how it's connected to today is that our work is often premised on the fact that it's not necessary in many cases to reinvent the policy wheel, and that often excellent and effective examples of policy solutions actually already exist, and they can be adapted and spread and replicated. And I think nuclear weapon-free zones are a really, really great example of this, and I'm interested to see how this feeds into the discussion today. A quick note on the fellow co-sponsoring organizations before I pass on. As I mentioned, this event is organized by Abolition 2000, alongside parliamentarians for non-proliferation and disarmament, Our House, Basel Peace Office, Unfold Zero, the World Federalist Movement and Institute for Global Policy, and the European chapter for Mayors for Peace. And now it's my pleasure to pass on to our second moderator, Jackie Cabasso, to make her introductions and to introduce our first speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. My name is Jackie Cabasso. I'm the Executive Director of Western States Legal Foundation in Oakland, California. I'm a founding mother and coordinating committee member of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons and the North American coordinator of Mayors for Peace. And it is my honor to introduce Her Excellency Doreen de Broom, Ambassador of the Republic of the Marshall Islands to the United Nations in Geneva. But before I do, just a little bit of background. March 1st was Nuclear Remembrance Day, the 72nd anniversary of the Castle Bravo nuclear weapons test undertaken by the United States and the Marshall Islands. February 27th is the anniversary of the date in 2022 that the Belarus government changed the constitution of Belarus, deleting its status as a nuclear weapon-free country. Our event marks these 2 days and revives the proposal originally made by Belarus in 1990 for the establishment of a European nuclear weapon-free zone. The Bravo nuclear detonation had an explosive yield of 15 megatons, 1,000 times that of the weapon that destroyed Hiroshima. The United States conducted a total of 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands between 1946 and 1958. The radioactive fallout has had and continues to have a devastating transgenerational impact on the health and well-being of the Marshallese people. While U.S. nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands ended in 1958, the U.S. regularly test launches intercontinental ballistic missiles aimed at targets in Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands. I'm sorry to report that just 2 days ago, the U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command conducted a test launch of an unarmed Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile equipped with two reentry vehicles from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. Her Excellency Doreen de Broom serves as Ambassador of the Republic of the Marshall Islands to the United Nations in Geneva. She previously held senior roles within the government of the Marshall Islands, including Undersecretary for Asia and Pacific Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and served as Fisheries Policy Advisor to the Marshall Islands Marine Resource Authority. Ambassador de Broom is a long-standing advocate for environmental protection, ocean governance, and the rights of communities disproportionately affected by nuclear weapons testing. She is particularly committed to raising awareness of the gendered impacts of nuclear weapons and promoting gender-responsive climate and environmental policies. Her leadership reflects the Marshall Islands' historic and moral voice in global nuclear disarmament discussions. On a personal note, I'd like to add that it was my privilege and pleasure to know Ambassador de Broom's late father, Tony de Broom, then Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands, and a true global leader on nuclear disarmament and climate protection. I had the honor of working closely with him as I lent support to the legal team representing the Marshall Islands against the nuclear-armed states in their cases in the International Court of Justice from 2014 to 2016. And it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to have you with us, Ambassador de Broom. Thank you.
Thank you, Gomwaldada, Madam Moderators, fellow panelists, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening from Geneva. It is indeed an honor to join this occasion to commemorate the Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, which was on the 1st of March back in the Marshall Islands. Here in Geneva, we will have it tomorrow, Friday, the 6th of March. But I am grateful for the opportunity to speak about my country's experiences with nuclear weapons. And I'm especially honored to do this at a commemoration event hosted and attended by those that, while not from the Marshall Islands, stand in solidarity with us to honor our victims, recognize continued challenges, and support us in our pursuit of justice. Justice for victims demands the abolition of nuclear weapons in recognition of the legacy of our harms caused by their testing and use, as well as their continued existence. After World War II, while under a UN trusteeship, our atolls and islands were used to test nuclear and chemical weapons. Between 1946 and 1958, there were 67 known nuclear weapon tests, poisoning our environment and causing our people great harm and suffering that has transcended generations. At the time, the Marshallese people petitioned the UN Trusteeship Council to put an end to nuclear weapon testing program. Twice we came before the UN Trusteeship Council, and twice we were denied, with the tests allowed to continue. To aggravate the situation, the Marshallese people were subjected to a scientific study called Project 4.1 without their consent. Project 4.1 was specifically designed to study the response of human beings exposed to nuclear fallout and a radioactive environment. To allow for the study, the Marshallese people were misled into returning to contaminated and radioactive environments. And at the time, the scientists rationalized the decision to study the Marshallese people with racism, comparing us to mice, calling us uncivilized. The decision to resettle the Marshallese in a contaminated, radiated environment was deliberate. their humanity considered of less value than those of their colonizers. The Marshallese became sick with various cancers, infertility, stillbirths, and birth defects, including the birth of what they called, and I quote, jellyfish babies, a term used to describe children born without a skeletal structure and translucent skin, only to die shortly after. Despite these occurrences and hardships, they were repeatedly denied their request for relocation to safer environments, and they were misled that the environment was safe. They were also told by scientists that the stillbirths and birth defects were the result of incest and adultery, rather than their exposure to a contaminated environment. All the while, they were studied. Their symptoms were recorded, and their jellyfish babies collected in jars for research and documentation. They were forced to remain in this contaminated environment for 28 years, until they were able to secure passage to safer environments. To this day, there are Marshallese indigenous people that are still displaced and unable to return to their ancestral lands due to the remaining radioactive contamination, undermining their right to self-determination. The health effects of this nuclear legacy continue to this day, with high rates of cancer and other non-communicable diseases. Our right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment has been compromised and is exacerbated by the nuclear waste dump on the Runit Island, contained under a massive concrete shell known as the Runit Dome. With climate change-induced sea level rise, this environmental hazard is heightened as the Runit Dome does not have a sealed base and is partially submerged during king tides, meaning the toxicity and poison within the dome is being washed into the lagoon. With these historic, current, and likely future challenges, we cannot have the resumption of nuclear weapons testing. Nuclear weapons tests must be bound to the past and must never be allowed again, ever. Not now and not in the future. The creation of sacrifice zones and the cruel and inhuman treatment of human beings for the sake of these weapons, their testing and development, speaks to a deeper evil where these weapons are concerned. The pursuit of power often leads to the worst in humanity, and these weapons speak to that reality. In pursuing military dominance, humanity and human decency was set aside, and our environment and our people have suffered the consequences. We continue to suffer the consequences of the nuclear legacy to this day. We cannot allow another nuclear legacy to begin when ours is still continuing. We must find meaningful ways to convince nuclear powers of the need for restraint, the need for wisdom, and to refrain from acting on the worst impulses of humanity in the pursuit of power and supremacy. The ambition of a few is not a justification for the destruction of us all. The world will forever be a better place without nuclear weapons. We do not need nuclear weapons. There is no such thing as nuclear peace if it is grounded in the promise of mutually assured destruction. we have had enough tests done to understand that these weapons are abominations. Let us accept the fact and set them aside. In doing so, we guarantee a better and more peaceful world for future generations. Como Dada, and I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador de Brum. That was an amazing presentation, very, very moving. And I think often in these kind of events, the discussion is at a very geopolitical level, a meta level, power play type level, and that it's critically important to bring these issues back to the human dimension and human experience. So thank you for bringing the very real meaning of Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day to us. We're so appreciative for your time and for fitting us in. We've been informed that you do have to move on to another appointment now as well. So thank you once more for being here, and also to Augustine Sukimi, who is for your legal advisor, who's joining us to field any questions regarding your presentation later in the piece. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next presentation and next speaker now. It's my pleasure to introduce Olga Karach. Olga is a Belarusian political scientist, human rights defender, and one of the most prominent civil society activists from Belarus, sorry. She is the founder and director of the civil rights movement Nash Dom, which I'm hoping that I'm remotely pronouncing correctly, which is a network-based initiative promoting nonviolent civic engagement and civic participation in public life. Olga is a graduate of the European Humanities University in Vilnius and has received international recognition for her courage and her activism, including the Rada Boyle Courage Prize. Her work highlights the links between human rights, security, and democratic resilience. And we're, of course, very, very interested to hear her insights on the current situation in Belarus. So, Olga, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the possibility of being here and speak about the very, very painful situation for all Belarusians today. On the 27th of February 2022, it was very important but very hidden date for everyone. Only 4 days after the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, Lukashenko organized a constitutional referendum in Belarus, and he changed the Article 18 in our constitution, and the article previously stated that Belarus must be its territory a nuclear-free zone and remain neutral. Now the situation is changed, and 1 year later, on the 25th of March 2023, Vladimir Putin declared publicly that he would grant to Belarus and Alexander Lukashenko the Russian tactical nuclear weapons. Actually, by the way, on March 25 is a very specific day for all Belarusians, because this is the day of the Belarusian independence. This is some kind of, sarcasm in this way. As a human rights defender, I want to speak about the new trends, very dangerous trends in our region, and new moral dilemmas after the situation when Belarus has got the nuclear weapons. First of all, what we see, what we are witnessing now, this is some kind of new nuclear gold rush, sorry to say this, when every country, every state in our region is dreaming about its own nuclear weapons. We see the normalization of nuclear weapons in the political discourse, and and the moral danger. It's not only in the use in future, but also in gradual social acceptance of their legitimacy. So for societies, for people, now the nuclear weapons is something like new social norm. And of course, I want to remind that if we speak about nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons are in fact an entire industrial sector. Their production, maintenance, operation are extremely expensive. And of course, what I am afraid personally, that Russia or Europe, it doesn't matter, at least when they will count the expenses for nuclear weapons, they would like to use this only because this is too much money, from the state budgets. And of course, this is a lot of risky to use the nuclear weapons because they already spend so much money. And also, we have new trend in our region. We are living, and this is first time for, my 25 years of human rights defense, we are living in the situation of common paranoia, in which no one trusts anyone. And in this situation, it's very harsh to build any common dialogue. And to speak about nuclear deterrence or even to remove nuclear weapons, it doesn't matter from Russia or Europe. And now everybody wants to build so many barriers as possible from their neighborhood, and people see the nuclear weapons as the one the serious tool to protect from the neighbors. But at the same time, we have new religion now. People believe in nuclear weapons how other people believe in Babel or in the God. So this is, and also at the same time, in contemporary conditions, we see and we are witnessing a number of very strange and alarming situations involving the militaries, the armies of Russia, Belarus, Lithuania, Poland, any country. And we see how many miscalculations, how many mistakes the armies and military personnel is doing or was doing already. And it creates also the risky when the nuclear weapons in Belarus or in Russia and Europe should be used from miscalculation, not even with any special goals. And also, if you speak about moral dilemmas, it's very important to say about that we have the dilemma like security for some versus security for all. When nuclear arsenals are justified as instruments of national security in Russia, in Belarus, or in European countries, but they create common feeling of systematic global insecurity in our region. And so it's very strange when Belarus speaks or Lukashenko speaks like, oh, we feel safety, but the safety, this is a safety only for one state, but in unsafety for others outside and around. Also, the nuclear weapons in Belarus create the change of the social hierarchy. I don't know how we step back, but again, we have some countries who is more important, they have nuclear weapons, and some countries who is not so important. And the first categories of countries can ignore them, can don't listen them, and the same about people. During the war, we have again, for me, it's very strange as human rights defender. First group of people who is number one on the top. Usually, this is the man with the weapons on hands, and other social groups like women, children, elders are not so important. And what we see as a consequence, we see the consequence as more and more countries leave different conventions, including Istanbul Convention, like in Latvia. This is withdrawal of different very important convention to protect civilians. So civilians are not important anymore. And we are in new situation when the new militarized security logic is emerging, when the human life value costs zero. And this is very interesting how we can stop the process and how we can return to the common respect and common dialogue. And also the situation with the Belarusian nuclear weapons opens a discussion what means Europe and where is the border of Europe, because again, in the situation of common paranoia, it's impossible to win and it's impossible to remove nuclear weapons only from Belarus or only from Russia or only from Europe. We can do it only together. And in this situation, we need new campaigning for removal of European nuclear weapons without political borders, without understanding that Europe is only the European Union. And of course, again, if we speak about moral dilemmas, we also have to return to the understanding that survival of states versus of survival of humanity. We have to, and nuclear strategy is often framed around the survival of states, national security, national interests, national regimes, alliance, I don't know, everything, but not about people. But ethical perspective shifts the focus towards the survival of youth and people in our region, in biosphere as a whole. So I want to finish my statement now, but what I want to ask everyone who is listening, who is watching now, please help us to organize the campaign to removal, but also European nuclear weapons, Russian nuclear weapons. We can do it only together if we are united. Because everything what we need now, we need peace, we need respect, we need to return to the common dignity without hierarchy, without any segregation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olga. That was a very stimulating and inspiring and terrifying presentation. And it kind of reminds me, or I would like to point out that unfortunately, it seems like things in Europe are going in the opposite direction right now. On Monday, Emmanuel Macron, who was speaking from the Ile submarine base in Western France, announced, quote, a new step of France's deterrence. And his speech marked what could be a start of a major shift in policy that for the first time would allow temporary deployment of French nuclear armed aircraft to allied countries. This is because the Europeans do no longer believe that they can rely on the US nuclear umbrella. And in addition to announcing this planned increase in the size of the French nuclear arsenal, he said that France had started nuclear talks with 8 nations: Britain, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Sweden, and Denmark. Partners joining the initiative would see their territory, quote, gain a clearly affirmed link to our deterrence, according to Macron. Deterrence, of course, meaning nuclear threat. So bearing that in mind, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name or where you're from, is Bojan Lazarevsky, a political scientist specializing in international and intercultural studies and a youth advocate for a world without nuclear weapons. He is a fellow of the inaugural cohort of the United Nations Youth Leadership Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons. Based in Skopje, North Macedonia, he works in youth networking and project coordination within the NGO sector and contributes articles to local and international media. He is actively engaged in research and advocacy focused on youth participation, peace building, and international cooperation. Through his work, he represents the growing role of young leaders in shaping global security debates. And we're very happy that you were able to join us, Bojan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and also thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this discussion today. I'm probably the youngest speaker on this panel, and I hope to bring a youth perspective to this conversation. It's always valuable to have diverse voices in discussions, especially like this one, especially since nuclear disarmament is such an interdisciplinary field that connects law, diplomacy, humanitarian concerns, of course, security. So yeah, as someone who recently visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki as part of the program Youth Leadership Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, I was reminded that nuclear weapons are not just strategic tools, but they also are weapons with catastrophic humanitarian consequences that can go along with years and decades and can be still felt today. And while I had already been interested in security related questions, this program deepened my interest in nuclear disarmament specifically, and particularly in the concept of nuclear weapon free zones. And this program also inspired me to focus my master's research at the moment on the role of international organizations like UN in nuclear disarmament and nuclear weapon free zones. So last summer, I spent some time in Vienna, which is a key hub for these topics, where I had the opportunity to further explore these issues and engage with experts in the field. However, I'm mentioning all of this because I noticed that proposals for a European nuclear weapon free zone receive comparatively less attention in the academic and policy literature. Another thing that struck me during this research is that the idea of a nuclear weapon free zone in general actually originated in Europe. And although that's the case, today Europe is perhaps the only major region, right, without one among the existing nuclear weapon free zones. And the principle behind these zones is quite simple. States mutually agree not to host, acquire, or deploy nuclear weapons within a defined region. And as we know, applying this idea to Europe today is clearly complex. The continent includes several different categories of states that we can identify. We have nuclear armed states on one side, Russia, and then France and the United Kingdom, who are also NATO members. Then we have NATO members that host nuclear weapons under nuclear sharing arrangements, and as it was also mentioned before, we are hearing now the possibility of more countries potentially hosting nuclear weapons in the future. And then we also have countries like Belarus hosting nuclear weapons from Russia on the other side. And finally, there are many, I would say a third category, many European states that do not have any nuclear weapons at all hosting or having them. And because of these different security arrangements, creating a European nuclear weapon-free zone, we would agree that is clearly challenging. But at the same time, all these challenges also highlight why the discussion of this topic is important, as European nuclear weapon free zone could contribute to reducing the nuclear risk on the continent. And I would say it could help create a buffer of non-nuclear states and something that's very important, rebuild the dialogue on arms control and the process of trust building, if you want, in conflicts, especially since we have ongoing war in Europe. So strengthening international norms against nuclear weapons. This can be quite important in time when there are increased discussions on also security architecture in Europe for the future, especially by the European Union, but also ongoing discussions within NATO and other countries discussing their security interests and positioning in this in all this current environment. Importantly, these arrangements are not based on unilateral disarmament, as we know from the other nuclear weapon free zones that we have. They are built on mutual commitments, and they can often be supported by security assurances from nuclear armed states. And I would mention one. I also wrote an article about this. One possible starting point that sometimes is discussed in the literature is the idea of establishing, which could be maybe more realistic, a nuclear weapon free zone in a limited region like Central or Eastern Europe or both, which could serve as a first step toward broader regional arrangements and to like a starting point for all these ideas. Of course, discussing such a proposal may seem today even more difficult given the ongoing broader security situation, but in a time when fears of escalation have returned to Europe and globally, exploring cooperative security arrangements could be more important than ever. So I mean, from history, history can tell us that ambitious ideas like this one often begin as discussions in forums like this one today. And it's important to keep the discussion going and explore different scenarios and how they can fit today, no matter how complex the situation on the ground is. So even if European nuclear weapon free zone may seem distant or utopian today, or like the global disarmament. So continuing the conversation about alternative security frameworks, I would say, remains a very important step toward reducing nuclear risks and something that could help eventually build a more stable future. So that would be for now, to keep it short so that there's more time for also questions from the other speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Boyan. You're bubbling with ideas. This is great to see, and this is exactly, I think, the energy we need coming into these discussions. And I had to think about what you said about encouraging more youth voices on these issues. I think it's very important. The youth are, at the forefront of the global climate movement, connecting across borders on a global issue of survival, and exactly the same could be applied to this nuclear issue. Within my work, I have to reference quite a lot the Maastricht Principles on the Human Rights of Future Generations, and therein explicitly these principles detail that the perspectives and the participation in decision making of children and young people with respect to intergenerational risks should be really accorded always special weight. So thank you for bringing that special weight into the discussion, and I hope we all continue to support those kind of inputs. Moving on to our last panelist today, before we are open to questions, it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend and colleague, Alan Ware, fellow Kiwi, here today. Alan is an international peace educator and disarmament advocate with decades of experience in nuclear abolition, international law, and non-violent conflict resolution. Or as I like to refer to him, the L lexicon on peace and disarmament issues. He serves as the global coordinator of parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, as director of the Basel Peace Office and a co-founder of On Unfold Zero, as well as being a World Future Councillor and spokesperson on peace and disarmament for the World Future Council. There's always a lot of titles to get out here. Originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and now based in Prague, Alan has held numerous leadership roles in international peace initiatives and has worked closely with governments, parliamentarians, and civil society actors alike. He was the recipient of the Right Livelihood Award, or otherwise known as the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize, and several other international accolades recognizing his sustained contribution to advancing nuclear disarmament and to promoting cooperative security. So, Alan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa, and also a big thank you to the other speakers today. It's an honor to share the platform with such incredible people, starting with Ambassador de Broom on the impact of nuclear testing in the Pacific. It was that which got me interested in the whole issue of nuclear weapons and international peace, learning about the impact of the tests on women and children, the US nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands, the French nuclear tests in Mururoa, Whangatauwha, and the British nuclear tests in Australia and Christmas Island, all had incredible impact, and demonstrating that the nuclear arms race is killing people from the start of the arms race. It's not just if there is a nuclear war in the future, which of course is a real risk. It's the very aspect of doing this which is killing people, and that we need to stop this because of the impact on people, and that's current and future generations. which is where I was so happy to see that the Human Rights Committee in 2018 took up the issue of human rights and nuclear weapons. I think, Teresa, you may have mentioned before that generally the issue of nuclear weapons to be talked about more in the security circles and in geopolitics, but the impact is on people. And the Human Rights Committee took this up and I think did a very good job, because in 2018, the Human Rights Committee said that the threat or use of nuclear weapons, the testing and production of nuclear weapons is incompatible with the right to life under the UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And that there is an obligation for states under human rights law to refrain from the threat or use of nuclear weapons, to end the production, no longer test nuclear weapons, and also to work for a nuclear weapons-free world. And this was a really important development of that human rights law was being applied. It complemented other law that had been applied to nuclear weapons in the International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion 1996, which applied international humanitarian law and the law of peace and security, with similar conclusions that their threat or use of nuclear weapons is generally illegal and there's an obligation to work for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And this year is the 30th anniversary of that historic case in the International Court of Justice. But what's happened, I think, with the Human Rights Committee taking this up, it's now given space in the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And in this space, governments like Marshall Islands and Kazakhstan have taken a leadership by drafting a joint statement of governments on the right to a world free from the threat, the human right to a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons. So commendations for the governments. Also, in civil society, we've taken this opportunity to engage in the Human Rights Council on what are the responsibilities of states. And we have a wonderful process under human rights law called the Universal Periodic Review, which is that every country in the world comes up for a review of their obligations under human rights law. It's round about every 5 years. So what we've been doing is, when it comes up the time for the review of the implementation of human rights obligations by the nuclear weapon states and by the states that are under extended nuclear deterrence, because they're part of this, we have been coming and asking questions and making proposals on, again, the elimination, the shift away from nuclear deterrence towards a nuclear weapons-free world. So that included some of the NATO states, and also included last year Belarus, because Belarus's turn came up for review. So I'm just going to share the recommendations that we put in there, because as well as criticising governments, the best thing to do is put recommendations. Oh, and also to support, if they're doing a good job on something, to support. And, you know, Belarus, as I think Bohan mentioned, Belarus had actually previously supported a European nuclear weapon-free zone. In fact, they were one of the ones who put forward that proposal in the beginning. And as Olga mentioned, Belarus, when it became independent, you know, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, adopted a constitution that was against nuclear weapons. It prohibited nuclear weapons in Belarus, to set up Belarus as a nuclear-free status, and then rescinded that, just as Olga mentioned, a few years ago. So we, in the submission, called on Belarus to reinstate Article 18 of its constitution, also to refrain from the threat or use of nuclear weapons, and to support a move away from the reliance on nuclear deterrence. And I can just share that with you. I have here Belarus. So this is from our submission, which we'd also did with Olga's organization, Our House, and many others. And this is just a summary of it. Again, understanding that the countries, you know, within Europe and around the world who are either nuclear weapon states or allied, their reason for relying on nuclear weapons is to prevent aggression, to deter against aggressive attack. That reason is of course understandable, but the nuclear weapons are the wrong approach. to addressing that reason. There are other ways to protect oneself from aggression than nuclear deterrence, and in particular using common security, international law, and the UN Charter, which were referred to here. The UN Charter affirms that the threat or use of force is illegal, and that countries have a responsibility to resolve their disputes peacefully through diplomacy, negotiation, arbitration, adjudication, regional organizations, and other methods, not through the threat or use of force, which the nuclear weapons is. So the recommendations derive from that Belarus should give up the support for the threat of use of nuclear weapons, support initial measures like no first use agreements under the nuclear weapon states, reinstate the commitment in Article 18 to Belarus as a nuclear-free country, return to Russia all the nuclear weapons on its territory, renew the proposal for a European nuclear weapon-free zone, and replace reliance on nuclear deterrence with common security approaches, full adherence to the UN Charter, and acceptance of the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. And I'll just say a little bit about that last one. International Court of Justice is really important. Stop there. Because it is one of the key methods for the peaceful resolution of disputes between countries if it's difficult to resolve those diplomatically or through other means. But one needs to accept the compulsory jurisdiction of the court to be able to do that. And I come from New Zealand. We've accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, and it's been very, very helpful. We resolved a dispute with France, for example, over nuclear test scene in the Pacific through the use of the International Court of Justice. A dispute with Japan over whaling in the Antarctic was resolved that way. Environmental issues on Nauru, we didn't do it, but Nauru resolved their environmental issues with us, with New Zealand, through the International Court of Justice. So it's a very, very important process, and this is a way that countries can have better security, is if they've accepted the jurisdiction of the court, then there is a way for resolving those conflicts rather than the threat or use of force and procuring war. So that's something that we also suggest should be built into a European nuclear weapon-free zone. One of the difficulties, and Bohan mentioned some of these, with establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone as Europe, is there's not a lot of confidence in the negative security guarantees that are attached to nuclear weapon-free zones. What are those guarantees? So in the nuclear weapon-free zones that have been established in Latin America, in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Central Asia, the countries in the region agree, as Bohan mentioned, not to possess nuclear weapons or host them, have them in their territories. In addition, they have protocols for the nuclear weapon states to recognize and respect the zone and not threaten or use nuclear weapons against the zone. And it's these security guarantees which are very, very important in order to build confidence. In Europe, there is some lack of confidence with the guarantees because Russia violated the Budapest Memorandum, which was the agreement that when Belarus and Kazakhstan and Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, the other states, particularly Russia, US, and the UK, because they were the co-signatories to this, would respect the territorial boundaries of these countries and respect this. And Russia didn't do that and invaded Ukraine. So there's some hesitation, I think, from some of the European countries to go, well, if we set up a European nuclear weapon-free zone, how do we know that other countries are going to respect it? And that's where the International Court of Justice plays a really important role. In some treaties, for example, the Genocide Convention, the Convention Against All Forms of Racism, Convention on the Rights of the Child, a Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and some others, they have what's called compromissory clauses, that if there's a dispute amongst the convention, any party to that convention, that treaty, can lodge a case against the other party in the court. That's why we have cases on genocide in the International Court of Justice at the moment. So I'm suggesting that one thing to add to the model for a European nuclear weapon-free zone, which has been discussed, is to include a clause on the ICJ case, and that could build up confidence. And the fact that we have seen the court operating so well, that more and more countries are using the International Court of Justice, partly because of the breakdown in other systems. They can't rely on the Security Council because of the veto power of the P5. The UN General Assembly doesn't really have the power, to determine illegality of actions. The court is actually playing a really important role, which is why so many countries are referring to the court. So bringing the court into the part of the role for a European nuclear weaponry zone, I think gives a little more confidence that this could actually be a feasible approach. Again, it's not something which we expect would happen tomorrow. There's a lot of negotiations that we have to go around, but it's really important to put forward a model of a common security approach in Europe to address these issues of aggression, rather than just building up more either conventional military forces or nuclear weapons. We have an alternatives to that. And that's what we're adding to this discussion on the European nuclear weaponry zone. And it connects very much, again, of course, with the experience of the nuclear testing and the illegality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons under both international humanitarian law and now human rights law. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And thanks to all of the speakers for, I think, a very rich discussion coming at a very critical time. And before opening up to the Q&A that are in the Q&A box, I wanted to ask a question or pose a question to the panelists, which is the 5-year review of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference is coming up in April and May in New York. And the NPT has been under growing pressure in recent years because of the apparent complete disregard by the nuclear armed states of their obligation to negotiate in good faith the end of the cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and negotiations on the elimination of nuclear weapons. But nuclear sharing has also been an increasingly controversial issue there because, of course, the United States has nuclear weapons deployed in 5 NATO countries, and now with Russian nuclear weapons deployed in Belarus, and with France and other European countries openly talking about the possibility of developing some new kinds of nuclear sharing arrangements, I think this is going to be a hot topic. And just I would point out that somewhat ironically to me, in the French Ministry of Defense paper that accompanied President Macron's recent speech, they claim that this policy is fully in compliance with the NPT and how important the NPT is. So I'm just wondering if any of you have any insight or observations or expectations about what we might see at this NPT conference, coming also, of course, in the wake of this horrific U.S.-Israeli illegal, unjustified, immoral war on Iran. Anybody want to take that?
I can
Alan?
step in if no one else is ready to yet. In terms of our approach to the very distressing global situation at the moment with powerful countries like Russia and the United States stepping away from international law and doing actions that are in violation of the law, and the difficulty to address that because they have veto power in the Security Council, so they can block action about that. I think there's a couple of approaches here which are important, and this relates to that what might be possible at the NPT Review Conference. The first is we have to reaffirm and reinforce the importance of international law and not give up and not say, oh, there's no international law just because these big powers are going against it. I already mentioned the International Court of Justice comes into play. It's got a really important role in that. But it also, we saw, for example, the UN General Assembly took a really important role when the Security Council couldn't condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine because of the Russian veto. The UN General Assembly stepped up and affirmed that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a violation of the UN Charter, and the UN General Assembly did not accept the annexation, of the territories that Russia claimed that's now part of Russia. So we can still use other UN bodies, even if we can't get Security Council in enforcement of the rule of law. A second aspect, I think, is we can even chip away at the Security Council. The P5 are using their veto power illegally under the UN Charter. The UN Security Council decisions are supposed to be done in accordance with the principles of the United Nations, and that includes preventing crimes of mass atrocity and preventing aggression. So if the P5 are using their veto power to protect aggression or to protect crimes of mass atrocity, it's actually against the UN Charter. So there's a proposal now, and the President of Slovenia announced this at the UN General Assembly high-level session last year as a really good initiative to get the International Court of Justice to affirm the illegality of the use of the veto power in cases of aggression, crimes of mass atrocity. And also the UN Charter says that when a P5 member, when a Security Council member is a party to a dispute, they should refrain from voting. So we can chip away there. And the third thing, and this is where nuclear weapon-free zones are a good example, is middle power countries can work on their own initiatives together. They don't have to wait for engagement or support from Russia, US, or other big power countries. Nuclear weapon-free zones are a case in point. The countries pulled them together, they negotiated them, and once they've established them, then they asked for support from the nuclear weapon states. They didn't require that support to move ahead. So I can see at the NPT, it's going to be very, very difficult to get like any decent sort of joint outcome that includes support from all the states parties, because the P5 are all in there. But we can get initiatives that can be established even if they might not get agreed at the NPT. An example of one of those initiatives is the UN now holds a conference for establishing a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. And they've moved ahead with that. There was enough traction moved in the NPT to get that going as a standalone UN conference. Another initiative, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. There wasn't agreement under the NPT parties, but a lot of traction was built up, and that was then negotiated through another standalone UN process. So I see the NPT review conference as a way that the middle power countries and civil society can work together on some of these initiatives and move these forward, even if you don't get agreement from the P5.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Teresa, did you have any follow-up question, or should we go to the Q&A?
I do. I'll try to be quick because I want everyone to have their chance to ask questions. One level that I was thinking about that hasn't entered the discussion so much is the level of parliamentarians and approaching them and lobby work in this sense to get this message across. And I noted that in 2009, there was an Interparliamentary Union resolution encouraging the support of nuclear weapon-free zones. So there is a level of international parliamentary accountability also to encourage and support nuclear weapon-free zones. So do any of the panelists perhaps want to comment on that and how the Interparliamentary Union may be more effectively used as a body to lobby on this topic?
I apologize, that's probably me again, because my organization, Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, is engaging the parliamentarians, and we have permanent observer status at the Interparliamentary Union. For those who don't know, the Interparliamentary Union was one of the first international organizations set up at the same time as the International Committee of the Red Cross. The founders of Red Cross and the Interparliamentary Union were the winners of the first Nobel Peace Prize 125 years ago. So the Interparliamentary Union is 184 parliaments. So it's the parliaments that are the members of that. My organisation is a network of parliamentarians, individuals. So we work. It's quite. We work together. Yes, the IPU. They bring 2 assemblies per year, for about a week. They bring around 600-700 parliamentarians from around about 150 of the parliaments. Not all of them can attend because they're in election cycles or something like that. Excellent way of getting cross-fertilization of ideas, of building support, etc. We're talking with IPU at the moment about their engagement in the NPT process. They will be being engaged. We're just not sure the modalities. They'll probably we may do a joint side event, etc. Yes, they are supportive. They will support for nuclear weapon-free zones, for elimination of nuclear weapons, for common security. So there is a lot of engagement there. A key point, and this is something we've been doing a lot more with the IPU, is we've been building intergenerational events with the IPU on nuclear disarmament and common security. We've been doing a lot of online events, but also some at the assemblies. So that's really important. And the other one is building civil society engagement with the parliamentarians. And that's important because the parliamentarians are generally elected, sometimes appointed, depending on upper house. They're generally elected representatives of civil society. So they have a role to represent civil society, which means is we have access to them. They're supposed to pick up, ideas that we're putting forward, take those forward. So yes, there are ways of doing that. As the individual members can join our network, PND, and get very active. We'll have a delegation there. And then through IPU, we can help get the access. That's a bit more difficult, but we have the access into the Parliamentary Union.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So we move into the questions that have been posed? I just also want to thank
I think Olga has a hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Olga.
Yeah, can I add something? Because it's not only about parliamentarians, because I'm quite impressed at how unbelievable lack of information about the problems around the nuclear weapons we have in Russian-speaking area. When I started to ask my colleagues about START agreement, it's zero. Nobody knew even around, among people who is against nuclear weapons. If you speak about ordinary people, it's like, I don't know. So if we think about good campaigning, it's not, I'm totally agree how to connect and activate in politicians. But in my opinion, we also have to think how to inform ordinary people about all such kind of complicated questions around nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence. Otherwise, we cannot have any influence for politicians because the topic is absent.
Thank you, Olga. I think that's kind of a problem that a lot of us experience in different situations. I just wanted to thank people who are posting links in the chat to reports and articles. There's a lot of very valuable resource material there, in part to address your concern, Olga. So I think we'll try to include those links in the follow-up that we send out with the recording. So let's take a few questions. I'm trying to take questions maybe that are posed to individuals before going to a whole group question. So Augustine, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. Recognizing that you are legal advisor to the Marshall Islands and not Kiribati, there's a question that says, following the disastrously radioactive effects in these islands in the Pacific Ocean, and notably Kiribati, the authorities of Kiribati have requested asylum for them and their inhabitants. What is the current situation in Kiribati, if you know?
Hi, Jackie. Thank you very much. With respect to the level of radioactivity in Kiribati, I would not be able to speak to that with authority. But I can say that given their international advocacy and how they lead initiatives with respect to environmental remediation and victim redress under the TPNW in the General Assembly, that it's an important national priority for them. So that's as much as I understand. I do know that they went through a lot of testing and that they are partners of the Marshall Islands with respect to our pursuit of nuclear justice. We support them just as well as they support us. But on the current state of radioactivity, I wouldn't have that information.
Thank you. How about Alan? Did you want to say something?
Sorry, just a little bit more. What I understand, I think that the Kiribati request for support was actually with regards to the climate issue. So these are climate refugees, and there are a number of court cases on this in order to provide the legal status of climate refugees because of the disappearing islands in Kiribati. It's not just Kiribati, which is where it's happening, but they've got their low islands are already, high tides, they're washing over them. So there is some work on that. First, affirming that these territories still remain as a nation state, even when they're getting covered by the oceans. And two, yes, there is, a response. It's like a responsibility to support climate refugees, which is in the Pacific. There's the dual threats, from the residual impact of the radiation from the nuclear tests and now the climate change. And the International Court of Justice, of course, just came out last year, on the many of the human rights aspects with regards to climate change. A very important case from the court.
Augustine, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, if the question relates specifically to climate refugee and climate change, I know that I believe it was in 2018 where that was the position of Kiribati, and that was derived from Te Siota and New Zealand. But that's not the position of Kiribati now. They do not accept that there is climate refugees, and their position has been to move away from categorizing climate change as an existential threat to their statehood. So it's a bit of a shift in the sense that they are now taking a more firm position in fighting for the continuity of their statehood. And under previous leadership, it wasn't that case, and they were willing to explore what they had called migration with dignity. But I don't think that's the case right now. I think right now it's more similar to Marshall Islands right now.
Thank you, Gus. So we have a question for Bojan or Bojan. I'm not sure what is the correct pronunciation. Yeah. Bojan, okay. So what is your assessment on youth participation, especially in Europe, in the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament activism or decision-making process?
Thank you for the question, Martina. Also, I think youth participation, as with many other issues, Teresa mentioned climate, for example, is becoming increasingly important and recognized as important in discussions on also nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. The Youth Leadership Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons program is one example. I send it in the chat for those who want to check it out. And initiatives supported by organizations that want to be involved in these fields, like UNODA, creates opportunities for young people and professionals to build, let's say, their profiles and have better understanding in the technical, legal, humanitarian dimensions of, in particular, here would be nuclear weapons issues. I will reflect briefly on a theory in international relations, because now I'm working my thesis, namely the constructivism argues that international politics is shaped by ideas, norms, identities, not only by power. So in case of limited enforcing power by organizations, such initiatives can have maybe on long term the impact that we want to achieve, because many young people are engaging through, let's say, academic research, international programs, fellowship, dialogues, and that can ultimately create to raising the public awareness and potentially also changing the policies in respective countries, and then achieving what's the goal. In Europe, I think youth participation is still developing, but we are seeing more opportunities through fellowship mostly and research programs. And I think these experiences are very important. They help build the next generation of experts who can contribute to the discussions tomorrow, including on nuclear risk reduction and arms control. So that would be, I mean, the most valuable role for youth is to bring fresh ideas, perspectives, because young people are those who will live with the decisions of today in the future. So I would say it's very important, but still needs to be, let's say, more developed in Europe. But there is, I notice that it's being increasingly recognized, at least from my point of view.
Thank you. Teresa, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a little comment to that. Perhaps in addition to youth that are involved through academic pathways in these types of topics, the issue of military conscription, I think also pulls a lot of young people in a forced way, unfortunately, into these issues and into having to think about these issues in a way that they wouldn't have had to otherwise. And as terrible as that is, the developments in Germany, for instance, I think it also presents an opportunity to activate more of a youth base in these issues because they feel more directly implicated.
Thank you for that. I just wanted,
Can I also add something?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Yes,
Olga.
and I have very strange feelings today living in Europe because all political decisions, especially in Belarus and Russia, are making by very old men who doesn't care about future. Because in Belarus, the average age for men is 59 years old. Lukashenko is 71. So maybe for the Western countries is quite young, but for Belarus, he is very old and he lives much more than ordinary men. And of course, in this case, they don't care about the consequences of their decision. Because if you speak about the nuclear weapons in Belarus, this is many consequences for future generations, for young people who is growing up today and who has to solve very complicated questions in also about nuclear power stations too. And of course, in this case, we have to involve much more young people to be decision makers. In our peace movement, we need more young and very ambitious leaders to activate and to give the new energy for the European peace movement and anti-nuclear movement, because this is some kind of versus. People who doesn't plan to live a long time, and people who will face the consequences of the decision. Sorry to say this contradictional situation, but it's true. We need young people.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's an excellent point. And there is a question for you. So while you are unmuted, and I don't know who this person that's being referred to is, so maybe you do. If someone like Vuk Jeremic were the nominee for the UN Security Council for Secretary General, would you think he would promote nuclear abolition? Do you know who that is? That's for you, Olga.
Can you repeat? Because I don't understand the question.
Okay, if someone like Vuk, V-U-K, Jeremic, were the nominee by the UN Security Council for Secretary General, do you think he would promote nuclear abolition?
Oh, interesting question.
I don't know who that person is, so maybe one of you does.
Me too, but I hope that any clever person will promote nuclear abolition and will fight for removal of nuclear weapons from everywhere. I think there is no any logic to have nuclear weapons in our region at all. It's and especially in Belarus. So this is interesting question.
Alan?
When he was president of the UN General Assembly, he was the one who set up April the 6th as the International Day of Peace for Sport and Development. So through that, he was demonstrating some interest in the peace side. And he is also a member of the Kazakhstan group of leaders for a nuclear weapons-free world. So maybe that's where the question came from, because they saw that he is in this Kazakhstan group of leaders.
Huh. Okay. So why don't we close with a big question that everybody can answer if they would like to. And this was sort of touched upon by Ambassador de Broom, by Olga, particularly, and others. Please address the dehumanization of humanity as a political strategy towards potential nuclear war. Please include your views on the direction of the war in the Middle East and American and allies' aggression. So I think the central point here is this theme of dehumanization of humanity, which seems to be surfacing more and more. Would anybody like to have a go at answering that? It's not an easy question.
Jackie, I can answer it, but I'll have to answer based on Marshall Islands' own experiences. And I won't be able to relate it to what's going on in the Middle East.
Okay, go ahead.
So in terms of dehumanization, a lot of that was covered in Ambassador de Broom's speech, her statement. Basically, the racism that led to gross human rights violations. And how we are dealing with that now is we are exploring how to develop expertise and capacity in what we understand is transitional justice. So the pursuit of truth, justice, reparations, guarantees of non-recurrence. And the guarantees of non-recurrence would probably be the one to ensure non-repetition in future. So how we see it is transitional justice has been applied to post-conflict contexts, post-repressive regimes, authoritarian regimes. And in this instance, we say it's equally applicable in post-colonial context. And the idea is that in the pursuit of reconciliation, it does not have to be, I'm sorry, I forgive you, but it can be civic trust, the restoration of civic trust, given that we have a continuing relationship with the US. Then we will set foundations for that through truth, meaning the full disclosure of all information relating to the violations committed, justice, and adequate and appropriate response to those violations, reparations in terms of compensation and redress, environmental remediation included, and finally guarantees of non-recurrence, sufficient guarantees to ensure that nothing like that ever happens to the Marshall Islands. And hopefully we can expand it beyond that to not just the Marshall Islands, but the entire Pacific, the entire world, because we wouldn't want what the Marshall Islands went through to be suffered by others. And that's how we are dealing with the dehumanization aspect. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership and for that very thoughtful response. Would anybody else like to address the question? The dehumanization of humanity as a political strategy towards potential nuclear war? Alan?
Yeah, I can briefly. This is a tool used by autocrats and dictators to build power for themselves and their leadership by saying, I will protect you from the enemy. The world out there is a dangerous place. Everybody dislikes us, and, creates that sort of fear. And out of that fear, they can then justify their own power. And it's a false narrative about what humanity is. Humans mostly are peaceful, want to get on with each other. They don't hate someone, from their neighbors. They'd much rather live in peace. But we get this false narrative that's somewhat reinforced by media because it's much easier to tell a story, about a conflict. You sell papers or you get the story than it is about peace agreements. They're not quite as dramatic or as exciting. So it takes a little bit more work to really understand, that humanity actually is generally pretty good. There are exceptions, and we have to deal better with that. Unfortunately, those who are aggressive gain power. They like doing that. They want to gain power, and they abuse the system. So we have to have better global governance. We have to enforce law better. We have to improve the United Nations. It's not sufficient as it is at the moment. But in general, humanity is good. We need to spread that narrative along with success stories and good news stories. And I mentioned the International Court of Justice as an incredible success story, with actually resolving disputes that some countries had actually been in war, like Libya and Chad had been in war, US and Nicaragua, and the court actually ended those wars. Some helping out disputes before they get to wars. And others that may not be ending up in armed conflict, but still help move things forward. That's one side of success stories, but there are many other success stories. And I think Olga was talking about creating a marathon for peace sort of idea of bringing, like in Europe, for example, there's a lot of division that's been created by some of the politicians who want to hold on to their power. And Olga's come out with another idea that we use the power of sports to sort of bring people together, across the political divides and remind that we're all human and that humanity is generally good. Thanks.
And can I add also something, because as a person, as a Belarusian woman who is connecting with Belarus, with Russian people, with people in the Baltic states, in Poland, in other countries, I want to say that many people inside the countries, including Russia, by the way, including Belarus, they want to have peace. They don't want to participate in the war, but their voices are hidden, invisible, and nobody listening them. Why we need some kind of success stories like, yes, we think and we discuss with Alan and others how to organize some kind of common marathon. Can you imagine the action which can be organized together at the same time in Kiev, Minsk, Moscow, Vilnius, Riga, Tallinn, Stockholm, other cities, when usually ordinary people together, very peaceful people together are running or use bicycles, it doesn't matter, but show that they want to live together in peace. I strongly believe that we are in majority. This is only the question that people have no access to the public sphere to speak about their fears. They're afraid to speak that, I'm against the war because this is a lot of hate speech against, I'm against the weapons, and again, a lot of very strange situations. But we need such kind of stories when people from both sides can do something together and show that we are part of the whole humanity, and we can find the new path to peace. It's real because I see the feelings there, I see the feelings here, and in my opinion, if we remove the military propaganda and some kind of strange politicians up who push us to the war, we can solve all problems without killing each other. This is my believing, and this is my my understanding of the situation, because I speak not with 1, 2, 3 people, I speak with 1,000 people through different channels, and I see the same trend. People just want to live in peace, without nuclear threats, without threatening of their neighbors, but they don't know how to organize this. Let's help them to be united, to build new paths, and to show our own power, because I believe in people's power much more than in power of weapons. This is a question only how we can show it.
Thank you, Olga. Teresa.
Okay, I'll try to make this brief because I see that we're already reaching our maximum time for today. But I wanted to add to the idea of dehumanization. There's a lot of literature on these topics about. I think I read one text on the ordinary nature of extraordinary evil, and I think it's very important to embrace human nature in its full sense and not to polarize in the way that we think and the way that we communicate within civil society. If we've talked a lot about narratives and the power of narratives and counter narratives, and one aspect that I've noted working in civil society for a good while now is that often, obviously, funding is a problem. And that not adequate funds are given to communications. And it's so important to communicate these counter narratives and to do it in a professional and prolific way. So that the euphemisms that are used to dehumanize killing, within Nazi Germany, not to get too dark, but within Nazi Germany, they never talked about killing in their records. It was always cleaning. There were always uses of euphemisms. We see this happening in our media landscape all around us, and as civil society, I think that a real focus on very clever communication to provide counter narratives is very important to stop this dehumanization process.
Thanks, Teresa. And I think that we should draw this event to a close, but I do want to just acknowledge one was put in the Q&A, and this is, I think, a good one to leave on, which is study writing from Mexico. We had a Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Alfonso Garcia Robles, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his proposal to create a nuclear weapons-free zone, the Treaty of Tlatelolco, the first nuclear weapon-free zone in a populated area, and still a model, I think, for the world. And this predated, actually, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It's very significant. And I think that's something we should hold as a vision for a nuclear weapon-free zone in Europe, a nuclear weapon-free zone or zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and a zone free of weapons of mass destruction for the whole world. So I want to thank everybody again for your very thoughtful comments. Thank everybody who participated as a listener and who contributed in the chat. And I'm sure we will be seeing you again. So thanks, everybody. And we will be sending out a link to the recording and the links that are in the chat.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jackie. And Arlene, thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was very helpful.
Thank you, Olga. It was great. And Teresa, a pleasure. I'll
Yeah.
co-moderate with you anytime.